Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. In this episode, TCRS rubbishes the narcissism narrative. The framework of this episode comprises three areas. Number one, step-by-step dealing with three expert pundits. Number two, anchoring the narcissism narrative in the discovery. And thirdly, the TCRS assessment of the narcissism narrative and why it's not applicable to the Chris Watts case. Now, most, I think, have already encountered the narcissism narrative discussed all over social media. The word narcissism comes up a lot in blog comments on Crime Rocket. It comes up a lot in social media. There are entire videos focused on the topic. And I've had to deal with a lot of people who just keep parroting this idea of narcissism. So in this video we're going to talk about some of the sources of this idea, and hopefully by the end of the video some minds will be rescued from the abyss. I'm sure most won't be, but we'll get to that in a second. I would like to provide short audio clips referencing some of that source material, but since this episode is about discrediting them, I'm not going to put this video up with a with a risk of it being taken down, so I'm not going to provide any audio references in here. What I will do is I'll provide a link to the source material, other videos that deal with a narcissism narrative. I'm sure you've seen them before, but in case you haven't, you can refer to them. Some of them are quite short, but it might be good to refresh your memory on why perhaps you feel so strongly that the narcissism narrative is true and why you agreed with it to begin with. I've been itching to get to this part for a long time. I've really been irritated by the label. I often respond when people bring up words like narcissism, sociopath, psychopath, monster, evil. My sort of default response to that is I'm allergic to labels. True crime isn't that reductionist and it's not that simplistic, and it shouldn't be. As soon as you reduce a criminal to a word, you better make sure that word is appropriate, and in this case it isn't. And as soon as you do that, you misappropriate a word, you send an entire swathe of followers down the wrong rabbit hole, and that's what happened. That is what has happened here. You have an interesting scenario with the Watts case where people claim that they don't understand Chris Watts, they don't understand why he did what he did, they don't understand the motive, and so on and so on and so on. And then on the flip side of that coin, they say he's a narcissist. And they don't see the link between their inability to explain Chris Watts and how he thinks and his psychology and everything, and the narcissism narrative. They don't see a link between the two. Well, there is a link. You can't explain it because your narcissism narrative doesn't apply. That's why you can't. Don't take my word for it though. Through the course of this video we'll explain why it doesn't apply, and we'll use the discovery to explain that, and we'll take on some of the pundits firsthand and explain why some of their contentions don't make any sense when you think about it. And that's quite important. You do need to think about it. You need to think about it logically, scientifically, and sensibly, right? As much as I've been itching to deal with this, I realize one's got to deal with it in a, to some extent, sensitive way, but in another sense, a almost aggressive way. I think it is important to root out the loud mouths and the opinionated idiots who have been pushing this narrative. So if this rubs you the wrong way, that's intentional. There's some people who maybe aren't sure, and this is really for them. It's for intelligent people who have been kind of misled by listening to the media and listening to some of these YouTube videos. So I'm confident that this episode is going to rub the majority following this case, and perhaps even the majority listening to this video the wrong way. That's good. That's intentional. I want to drive a wedge between the discerning true crime followers and the mindless mob. And I want to be very clear. I want you to choose which side you're on. I want you to make a choice. And this video is going to be an educated choice where you decide to continue taking the red pill or the blue pill, but you are going to choose one pill or the other, and then you must stay there. You must stay there, and that's fine. So an expert like Dr. Phil tells you what is a narcissist, and then you head to your nearest echo chamber and repeat and recycle the nonsense. You know with absolute certainty that what is a narcissist because Dr. Phil told you, and Dr. Phil couldn't be wrong, could he? And it feels good, doesn't it? One word becomes your fortress of information. One word becomes your justification. One word becomes your sort of foolproof answer to this whole complicated saga. You've got your answer, and you're one of the few that are informed, except you're in the majority that are all saying the same thing. What you're really doing is you're transferring your own innocence and getting a satisfying sense of victimhood using this particular term. As I've said before, the Chris Watts case isn't about you. There was a time, by the way, before the murders where the Watts family went about their business irrespective of you, ignorant of you, and not influenced by you. There was a time when the Watts family were living in Colorado, also even living in North Carolina, and they didn't know that you existed. You also didn't know they existed, and they went about their lives with quiet confidence, right? Afterwards, after the murders became high profile and they made it into the media, suddenly the Watts case is all about you. It's not. The Watts case isn't about you. The Watts case is about what happened to the Watts family. It's about those people who died. These aren't characters in a story. They aren't characters in some kind of fiction. They're real people. They're real people with distinct identities, and identities distinct from yours and mine as well, right? Let them be who they are. Let them show who they are through their words and actions. Don't let who you are, or your situation, or your experience with an ex-husband or an ex-boyfriend or something from your past cloud what you are seeing in this case. In the majority of people following this case, that is exactly what is happening. You're not looking at the Chris Watts case as the Chris Watts case. You're looking at the Chris Watts case as projecting your own issues and your own attitudes to family and to relationships and to how men treat women and women treat men and control issues. You're projecting and transferring all of that into this case and getting some kind of feeling of justification from that. That's not true crime rocket science. It's not even true crime. In true crime, you investigate the case. You don't voyeuristically experience these people as entertainment or characters in some kind of soapy, right? True crime rocket science isn't here to win popularity contests or do fake PR to get traffic or sell books. True crime rocket science is here to shine a light on cases that inexplicably people just fail to understand. Cases that inexplicably seem to defeat even the experts. The experts go on television and they pontificate about things like motive and so on, and then the audience then runs with that pontification. And a lot of these experts that go on television are experts on dozens of cases at the same time, and they don't spend a lot of time studying any one particular case. They're too busy fluttering about like butterflies from the one show to the next, discussing the one to the other. And the difference between all of those people, and there are hordes of them, there are hordes of experts, there are hordes of pundits, there are hordes of journalists, there are hordes of YouTubers, etc. The difference between them and someone who writes a narrative is that someone who writes a narrative literally spends an entire day studying one particular case, and then the next day continue studying that particular case, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and then you eventually write a book, and you write hundreds of blogs all about one case. And over a period of a year, maybe you've written 9 books and again hundreds and hundreds of blogs. What's the difference between that particular methodology and everyone else? Everyone else is, during the same period, jumping to lots of different cases. Oh, that case has caught my attention. I think he's a sociopath. Oh, that case, that's really interesting. I think he's a narcissist. What differentiates True Crime Rocket Science from these others is the time spent studying, meticulously and systematically studying these cases. And over a long period of time, you become an expert at one case, and after a long period of time, you then move to another case. And then you notice intertextuality between the two. And the bottom line with what we're trying to do is create an authentic narrative. George Orwell once wrote, "In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." George Orwell is the author of Animal Farm. Not sure who of you have read Animal Farm, but it's a sort of a story where most of the animals are deceived, right? Animal Farm is social media in the world right now. We are in times of universal deceit, and telling the truth is a revolutionary act right now. In terms of the Chris Watts case, there are a lot of farm animals following this case, and TCRS is for a more intelligent audience. There are intelligent people who believe in the narcissism myth. There are university educated people who believe in the narcissism myth. And so what we're going to try and do in this episode is appeal to those people. I'm not really trying to appeal to the dummies and the idiots. I'm trying to appeal to the smarter people who can think for themselves and who can take a hypothesis and consider it. And I'm trying to get them to think about something in a different way. It's obviously understandable that not everyone has the amount of time to study a case or write about a case as much as I have. And so that's a service I provide. And obviously, for the first time in some people's cases, you're getting a expert view of the Watts case. And when I say expert, I simply mean a view based on an extended time studying this case, more than anybody else. I think I can say that with confidence, is that I've covered this case more than anybody else, including the investigators, including the lawyers, including any other media reporter. Which means you can sort of pick off the most important details almost off the top of one's head, because you've got such a voluminous understanding of the case that you can just, it's like off the top of your head. And so let's look at the references to the word narcissism in the discovery documents. Now, I'm not sure whether people have ever thought about that. Have you thought about what do the people in this case themselves say about narcissism? Isn't that maybe a good place to start, to anchor the narrative, to root the narrative? What do the people in the Watts case say about this whole narcissism thing? Right? So if we go to page 606 of the discovery documents, you have Chris's father, during an interrogation, saying that he believed that Chris's mother believed Shan'ann was unstable, a narcissist, and bipolar. That's the first of the two references. Now let's look at that scenario just for a few moments on its own terms. Ronnie isn't saying Shan'ann is a narcissist. Chris Watts isn't saying Shan'ann is a narcissist. Right? You don't even have them saying on their own kind of platform to the police, I think this person's a narcissist. Right? You don't even have that. What you have is a scenario where Chris Watts is facing a serious charge. The scenario has been presented to him that maybe Shan'ann killed the children. Chris Watts has mischievously taken that bait, and he's basically lied to his father and the police, saying, yes, Shan'ann did do this, right? And you say, well, what's the narcissism in that? Yeah, it's self-preservation. Is that narcissism? Or would anybody try and find a way not to spend the rest of their lives in jail? I'm talking about anybody would try to preserve their survival and their happiness. Is that narcissism? If we deal with it on its own terms, we see that what's actually happening here is it's Chris's mother who believed Shan'ann was a narcissist, right? And we know where that sort of came from. We know there's a conflagration between Cindy Watts and Shan'ann Watts, right? We know there was a kind of a violent verbal altercation between Chris's mother and Shan'ann. And obviously when Shan'ann left, Cindy would have said something to her husband about what she thought of Shan'ann. And one of the name-calling words would be that Shan'ann was unstable, that Shan'ann is a narcissist, that Shan'ann is bipolar, whatever. And I think that's quite important to bear in mind here, is that this whole idea of name-calling. You don't like someone, someone sort of insists on their way, and you call them a narcissist, right? The second reference is on page 631 of the discovery documents, and this time it's Shan'ann using the word, right? And in August, on the 5th of August, roughly a month after Nutgate, Shan'ann, I believe, is communicating with Cassie Rosenberg, and in the message to her, she says she won't change a thing about herself. So it's kind of in a situation where Shan'ann's talking about Nutgate and difficulties with her husband, and she's basically saying to her friend she's not going to change a thing. She thinks of herself as a saint for not telling his mother that she's a narcissist, stupid bitch, and she just said that they were done and never coming back. So Shan'ann's sort of telling Cassie that she will not change anything about herself, and she thinks of herself as a saint, and especially because she didn't tell Cindy that she's a narcissist, stupid bitch, and blah 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 blah. So here is Shan'ann directly telling one of her friends what she thinks of Chris Watts' mother. And so you have a situation where Cindy's calling Shan'ann a narcissist, and Shannann's calling Cindy a narcissist, and they're both doing it behind one another's backs. So you don't have a case where, as far as we know, you don't have a case where either of them are saying, I don't like you, you're a narcissist. Both of them are doing it indirectly, right, to someone else. And those are the only references in the discovery documents. There's nothing about that from Chris Watts. There's nothing about that from Nicole Kessinger. There's nothing about that from any of the other people. The only other term that starts to go into that area of psychology, if you want to put it that way, is OCD. And we know that Shan'ann owned that term. We know that her parents thought of it that way. We know her husband thought of her that way. So if you want to talk about psychology in a way that's grounded in the fabric of this case, then talk about obsessive compulsive disorder and talk about what impact that may have had. In any event, that's not what we're going to do here. We will touch on it again towards the end of this episode, but this is about debunking the whole narcissism nonsense. And so the bottom line is it's referred to twice in the discovery, and you can see the emotionally charged scenario in which it comes up. It's someone's very unhappy with someone else, and so the other person's a narcissist. What you actually have is two people calling each other a narcissist. Which one is the narcissist? Maybe they're both narcissists, maybe neither are. But there's something kind of silly and unscientific about these references, right? It's two women that are upset with each other, calling each other names. That's basically the bottom line. And I think that same childishness extends to the people pontificating about this case, calling Chris Watts a narcissist. It's just kindergarten 101 psychological analysis. It's not rocket science by any stretch. It's not even beginning to understand these people. But it is the beginning of misunderstanding them. Now, where did this come from? Where did this false narrative come from? Let's start with number one, Steve Wren, the Deputy District Attorney for Weld County. Now, definitely didn't start with him, but he was one of the figureheads who said the following. He said, "I do agree that this crime can only be committed by a sociopath. There's no other possible explanation." And this is something that Steve Wren said during the documentary Family Man, Family Murderer. And that came out relatively recently, so it's obviously not Wren who started this term, and he doesn't even use the term narcissist. He uses the term sociopath. That's another kettle of fish altogether. Sociopathy I don't think applies either, but it's interesting that he's used this term. It also sounds as if he's been fed the term by someone. So he says, "I do agree that this crime can only be committed by a sociopath." Well, who's he agreeing with? Someone said to him something and then he's agreed with it. So it sounds like someone's offered him the term and he's acquiescing to that term. It's interesting also that Wren says there's no other possible explanation. And I find that interesting because he's in a unique position where he was there when Watts was interrogated. He talks about how frustrated he was that they couldn't get to the truth. He was in the thick of things. And so if there's anyone who should know this case backwards, back to front, and backwards and forwards, it's him. And then he says, well, there's no other explanation for why this crime happened except that Watts is a sociopath. It would be very useful, I think, to test Watts for that. But True Crime Rocket Science will be the first to say there are explanations. And where Steve Wren says there's no other possible explanation, actually there are quite a few possible explanations. I don't want to conflate the idea that there are quite a few with the idea that, well, there are a few possibilities, we're not quite sure which. There's one explanation that explains everything very, very well. And just as as Ren is confident to say there's definitely no other possible explanation, I don't want to be that confident to say there absolutely is an explanation. I think it's important to stay a little bit humble and modest and say, well, maybe we don't know everything here. Maybe there's something else that could enhance our knowledge. So when I say there is a specific explanation, it's based on what we think we know. I don't think one can ever say we absolutely know everything. I think the biggest culprit in spreading the narcissism narrative is Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil sort of prides himself on being a celebrity psychologist, and so people get their psychology psychobabble from him. And I'm a fan of Dr. Phil. I thought he was great on Oprah, and Tell It Like It Is, Dr. Phil, etc. And he's an intelligent guy, and he often makes sense, right? In terms of this case, Dr. Phil has said that you can't make sense out of nonsense. He's basically saying that yes, this case there's no explanation for this case, which I disagree with. And he's also a major proponent that Chris Watts, if not the most major proponent of the fallacy that Chris Watts is a malignant narcissist and a narcissist. Dr. Phil was one of the first who sort of assessed Chris Watts' behavior and showed all the whole lie spotting things and said, well, a narcissist can only see things from his perspective, and that this is why Chris Watts made so many dumb mistakes. In any event, we'll deal with Dr. Phil in a moment in more detail, but the whole narcissism narrative amongst the masses, I believe, comes from him. The third, let's call it personality, is a YouTuber whose identifying avatar is about how to live free of abuse. And I want to deal with this particular person first. I'm not going to mention her name because she'll probably think it's some kind of personal attack. And what this is trying to understand the psychology of the Chris Watts case by discrediting the narcissism narrative. I'm not trying to discredit these people. I'm trying to discredit what they're saying about the Chris Watts case. So let's not try and get personal about it, but let's also face it. If you are out there spreading this kind of information, which I believe is misinformation, then you're doing a disservice to society and to other people. And what you're doing is you're also just transferring your own feelings onto everything else, and worse, getting other people to do the same. And for me, that's a serious problem. As a writer of books, I want to be careful that I don't put into my narratives my own bias and my issues and my weaknesses and whatever it is, and that then weakens the minds of other people and makes people. In other words, you don't want to contaminate other people with your issues. You want to authenticate people with your authenticity. You want to authenticate a true crime investigation with the truth, not with your own bullshit, right? So this particular YouTuber is one of those people I mentioned that's very well educated. She has a Bachelor of Science honors in psychology and a postgraduate degree in counseling psychology. And she's done extensive research on narcissism and the effects of narcissistic abuse. So this is really who she is. She's really made it almost like her life's work. She works as a coach. That's her job, specifically with people who have experienced narcissistic abuse. So this is literally, narcissism is her life's work. It's how she makes a living. her whole life is about sort of ministering to people and dealing with this particular issue. And the problem with that situation is when you're a hammer, everything around you is a nail. And what that means is if you're kind of a narcissism coach, or you feel you've lived with a narcissistic parent, or you've been abused by a narcissistic partner for most of your life, or in a way that was really traumatic, and you take that with you wherever you go, then when you're a hammer, everything around you is a nail. And then it makes complete sense that when you look at the Chris Watts case, you would say everything is about narcissism. The majority listening to this episode won't get it because, and I'm just being blunt, they're too dumb. So, there are a lot of people that listen to these videos and they're just too sort of cerebral. It doesn't have that tabloidy, punchy aspect. They want the very sort of thin version of it. They don't really want to think about things. And it's not my job, it's not the job of True Crime Rocket Science to change those people. True Crime Rocket Science isn't for you. It's appealing to the intelligent minority to apply True Crime Rocket Science to your thinking. It's not just about true crime, it's also about human psychology, and it's about understanding the science of man. And it's something I talk about on the front page of crimerocket.com. That's really what you're trying to do, is you're trying to understand the human being as a kind of a scientific project, if one can put it that way. We use true crime as one important way of telescoping into the human condition. It's a very important aspect, certainly not the only way of doing it. But certainly what True Crime Rocket Science does is it's unique in applying that psychology to the human condition in the way that it's done via crime. What I want this intelligent minority that I'm addressing right now to do is think about the analysis that we're going to go into in terms of the sort of psychological analysis, and that's all. You don't have to agree, but you do have to step back for a moment and consider someone else's point of view. Incidentally, a key trait of a narcissist is someone who can't imagine or can't think about how someone else might perceive them. That's something that Dr. Full says. I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm not sure that that's the only defining trait of a narcissist. I think some people just have one-track minds. I think some people, it depends. How you think about things also depends on how socialized you are. So, for example, if you're always in your own company, or you surround yourself with people who only share your point of view, then obviously you're going to have a kind of a tunnel vision. And social media does the same thing. If you are capable of tolerating a dissenting view, then and you've got people around you that have dissenting views, then you'll be generally more tolerant or able to simply consider a different view. While we're on this topic, I just want to talk about people have often accused me of where they disagree with me on something, say on Facebook or on a comment or whatever it is, that I would then block them. I have a problem with people who come and in an insulting, discrediting tone disagree. I've got no problem with someone who comes in a polite, reasoned, intelligent way and say, well, I've got this information, I disagree with you, and these are the reasons, and based on this information. I'm very happy to have those conversations, and I'm very happy to I'm very happy to be proved wrong, because if that's the case, then our knowledge of, certainly my knowledge of what we know improves. That the leading edge of the what we know about this case then extends. And quite a good example of this is the car. I thought the car Nicole Kessinger drove was a Mitsubishi GT, and it's not. It's a Dodge Dart, and I'm going to do a blog post on that, and why the sticker I saw on a Facebook photo that Nicole posted that has the Mitsubishi logo on it, why that was kind of misleading. But the point is, I'm the first person to say, wow, that's great, now we have the right information. Certainly not going to just block people because they disagree. The problem is a lot of people come disagreeing and they use terms like garbage and badly researched, and they don't really explain it. You can explain it in a way that's civil and reasonable, and I'm very happy to do that. Also bear in mind, I'm trying to sell my books and I'm trying to promote my work. So if you come around and basically say your work is useless, your research is it's just false, that doesn't reflect well on me, and it's not providing the proper context. So for example, you could say, if you said something like, hi, your assessment on the car isn't right, I did a check and it's that and that and that, and you can show that your information is right, then it has a place. But it doesn't have a place if it comes along with insults and undermining and all that sort of thing. Because what's also pertinent is to say, yes, maybe you made some mistakes. What about everything you got right? And let's keep a bit of context here and manners. Some things may be wrong, but what about what's right? Okay. So to get back to what Dr. Full says about a narcissist can't abide a dissenting view. He can't imagine a point of view besides his own. And this was really talking about why Chris Watts thought he could get away with murder. I don't really think that's true. It's also why Chris Watts, when he was doing his sermon on the porch, why he didn't think people would find what he was saying strange. I don't think that's got to do with narcissism. That's got to do with Watts not having much of a social game, and Watts also pretending that they were still alive and trying to look like, well, he didn't think it was such a big deal because they were safe and alive somewhere else. And the same thing applies in the interrogation. There is an explanation for why Watts didn't show that much emotion, and it is because in a premeditated murder, at some point you start preparing yourself emotionally for what you're going to do. So the same thing happened with Scott Peterson. If these people were psychopaths, then they wouldn't need to psychologically prepare themselves emotionally. They would just commit the murders. And yet in both Scott Peterson case, which I've written a trilogy about, the first book is called Blood and Seawater. Another one is Night Eternal, and so on. But the point to bear in mind is, in both those sagas, you have people noticing how these people are changing, that they're not the warm and affectionate Scott Peterson that they were. It's not the affectionate Chris Watts that he used to be. And the fact that he needs to do that means he does have a heart. He does need to steel himself for what he's about to do. He's thinking about it, but emotionally he's not sort of ready, and he's trying to get himself in a place where he is ready, and that's not acknowledged, right? The other aspect, where Dr. Full says they can't think about another point of view. So when Chris Watts was having an affair, Do you think he couldn't imagine what Shan'ann's point of view might be if he told her? He couldn't think about what her point of view might be. When Chris Watts was having the affair and he knew that Nicole Kessinger was pregnant, do you think that he wasn't aware of what she might think of that? So isn't he then thinking about her point of view? So as you continue listening to this episode, try to set your own narcissism, your own personal bias aside for a moment and consider things from the alien perspective of TCRS.
Worth playing for?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, so let's deal with one particular YouTuber. Again, I'm not going to mention her name. I really want to deal with one specific video that she made and the message in the first couple of minutes. I didn't listen to the whole thing. Again, this isn't a personal attack on this particular person. It's a criticism of the analysis. In terms of this YouTuber, that video, which is actually trying to explain the reason why Chris Watts committed the crime and also the psychology and the motive involved, that's kind of the purview of true crime. It's not really the purview of someone who works as a coach in narcissism. In any event, it's a very popular video, seen well over 200,000 times, and of those viewers, 3,000 liked her message and only 270, that's 9%, disagreed with what she said. I'm one of the 9%. And again, this message is directed kind of to the 9%, and I guess maybe another 1 or 2% who may be not so sure. It's not directed at the majority who sort of mindlessly agree with what the experts in inverted commas say. Now, in terms of the comments about why did Chris Watts murder his family, the YouTuber says, and I quote, "A narcissist needs to be the center of someone's world and be completely needed and adored by someone." Right. So, according to this person, Chris Watts is a narcissist and he needs to be the center of someone's world. He wants to be completely needed and adored, right? So, yeah, you see Watts, and when you see him in Shan'ann's Facebook videos, he doesn't want to be in them. Shan'ann is calling him and saying, you know, can you do this or can you say this or whatever, and he doesn't want to be in them. But hold on, I thought he wants to be the center of someone's world. Doesn't he want to be on her social media? Think about it when you are, think about it in terms of you and your boyfriend or you and your girlfriend. And it's selfie time. You know, don't you want to be part of the selfie? Don't you want to be part of that sort of focus of attention? But Watts didn't want to be part of it. So what's going on there? Also, he wants to be completely needed and adored. If he wants to be completely needed, why isn't he making himself available for the Facebook videos? Why does he not want to make himself adored by the people that are out there? And when you see the many videos that are out there, for example, where Chris Watts is at Myrtle Beach, does it look like he wants to be the center of attention in the video? Does it look like he is wanting to be adored by the people watching? One can say, well, at that stage he didn't want to be part of Shan'ann's world. Okay. What about when she announced that she was pregnant? Did he want to be the center of her world then? He looked very uncomfortable then. and you can keep making excuses and say, well, at that stage he didn't want to. Well, at what stage did he want to be part of the photos? At what stage did he want to be part of the social media extravaganza? There's the Christmas video where he's in a beard and sort of does he look like he wants to perform for the camera then? The YouTuber then goes on to say things changed and Shan'ann really started to do well and she got a lot of friends. So what's missing in that little snippet of information is when things changed and how did she start to do really well, in what, and who were these friends that she got. Like, be specific. The statement seems to be truthful and it seems to be accurate, but when we drill down into it a little bit, we see that Shan'ann started multi-level marketing arguably full-time in January 2017, right? So that was really when things changed a lot for the Watts family, because as soon as she started doing that full-time, Shan'ann changed. Shan'ann was constantly on social media. I think she became more extroverted. And it also changed the dynamic of her relationship with her husband. Shan'ann was used to pushing and promoting and selling and trying to encourage other thrivers to be pushy and promoting and selling. And then he has her husband who's sort of a shy wallflower, and she's not enjoying his reticence. She's not enjoying his unwillingness to dance when she wants him to dance. And so then there's also the thing of she started to do really well. Okay, so how did Shan'ann start to do really well? Does that mean she was successful financially? Does it mean she appeared in a magazine? Does it mean she was happy? I'm not quite sure what she means here, but there was a bankruptcy in 2015. I don't know what that has to do with things changing and things going really well. And she also mentions that Shan'ann got a lot of friends. If you take the whole multi-level marketing thing away, and let's face it, in the world of multi-level marketing, you make money when you recruit another person to your cause. So in other words, there's an incentive in inverted commas making friends, right? And what happens is, when you, with this whole multi-level marketing thing, is everyone is selling to everyone else. So you constantly see someone offering powders or whatever, and then another person who's also part of the whole Thrive thing buys that stuff because they've got to keep themselves above a certain level to get discounts. And so you have this absurd scenario where the thrivers are kind of buying and selling to each other, and then a few additional people kind of come on board, and so everyone is sort of in a captive audience, promoting one another, promoting themselves, and buying and selling to each other. Think about the people who own the company. Isn't this ideal? You've got people just, it's like a cult. They just say exactly what you want them to say, and they buy from each other when they ask each other to buy from them, and then some other people come on board, and then they become a bigger and bigger family of people just buying and selling, and then getting these discounts and being part of the various hierarchies and systems for rewards and so on. Of course, these powders are really overpriced, but we won't get into that. But the bottom line here is Shan'ann had a lot of friends. If you take away the multi-level marketing aspect, so you take away the people that were associated with Shan'ann who were part of Thrive, that's Nicole Atkinson, gone. Cassie Rosenberg, gone. Amanda Thayer, gone. Eddie Maloney, gone. Christina Meacham, gone, etc., 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 etc. Now you take all those people away, the people that Shan'ann had business relationships with, and now they are out of the picture. Who are Shan'ann's friends besides those people? Name one. Name one person who is not involved in multi-level marketing who is a very close friend of Shan'ann's. Shan'ann has disappeared, her children have disappeared, and in fact they are dead. Who has come forward to say, I'm Shan'ann's best friend, how is she? But they're not involved in multi-level marketing. Name one genuine friend from Shan'ann's past that she's kept a good relationship with, and it's not based on buying things from her or selling things to her. Name one. So who are Shan'ann's friends? So this whole thing that this YouTuber is purporting is Shan'ann suddenly had this new lease of life where things changed, she started doing really well, and she got a lot of friends. What part of that is true? Why did Chris Watts want to divorce his wife if things changed, his wife was doing really well and she had a lot of friends? Why would Watts want to divorce her or leave her or cheat on her? By contrast, if you take that same statement and you apply it to Chris Watts, you say things changed, she started to do really well and get a lot of friends, got a lot of friends. So things did change for Chris Watts. He started losing quite a lot of weight. He also changed jobs, although slightly earlier than Shan'ann did, and he did fairly well. He was bringing in at least a steady income. The house was on his name. He was living in quite a big house, a too big house, but he was basically living a kind of a okay life compared to just being a mechanic once upon a time. He also seemed to have some responsibility. I wouldn't say he was at the bottom of the food chain at Anadarko, but he certainly had other people that he worked with that he seemed slightly senior to some of his colleagues. He had the respect of his boss, and in terms of that he had kind of a community of co-workers going that wasn't based on selling powders to each other. It was based on guys working together in an industry, and he had a reputation as Rain Man, etc. In any event, he did fairly well at his job, I guess. He was fairly happy at his work, and to such an extent that a co-worker saw him and fell in love with him. He saw her and he fell in love with her. And so things had to have been going well for that to happen. Things had to have been going well in the workspace for him to recognize someone that he liked and was attracted to, and vice versa. I wouldn't say Chris Watts had a lot of friends ever in his whole life, but I would say that he did have some genuine friends who weren't involved in multi-level marketing and who he'd been friends with for quite a long time. A handful, but they were people not in it in the friendship to make money. They weren't part of some kind of multi-level marketing pyramid. So another aspect that I think isn't acknowledged by this YouTuber is Watts' marriage wasn't going well even prior to that. So, we're talking about Shan'ann started multi-level marketing in January 2017 with Thrive. In fact, she was actually involved with many other multi-level marketing companies, including Unique and LuLaRoe and others. Prior to that, she was always involved in multi-level marketing, but she never threw herself completely into it until January 2017. But the way that this person describes it is, she says, a narcissist needs to be the center of someone's world, completely needed, but then things changed and Shan'ann started to really do well. Well, when did things change? When did she start to do really well? According to Chris Watts, their marriage wasn't going well, basically the entire marriage. And we know for a fact that they went bankrupt in 2015. That was 3 full years before the murders. And they were facing bankruptcy for a second time, which means their marriage wasn't going, their marriage wasn't learning the lesson after that. So things clearly weren't going well just financially with these people. They're also living way beyond their means, and that's certainly an area where we can talk about narcissism. We can talk about why is there this need to live in this huge house and to paint the rooms, color code the rooms, and put people's names in the rooms, and the materialism. We can definitely talk about narcissism and the consumer, but as soon as we do that, oh no, now that might be touching on our narcissism, and how do we live, and what are our credit card situations, and how do we buy things that we can't afford. Oh, we wouldn't want to do that. We wouldn't want to associate the narcissism of the Watts case with our own narcissism. It's just Chris Watts that's a narcissism. No one else is here, right? The other aspect is that even Shan'ann's parents faced severe financial difficulties to the extent that they lived with the Watts family for, 15 months. That couldn't have been pleasant. Sandy was someone who liked to have her beauty sleep. She liked to sleep through the entire night. So, and in the morning, and so it was Chris's job not to wake her up in the morning. Where does the narcissism fit into that story? And also, if you're in a situation where you married and your spouse wants her parents or his parents to come and live with you, where does the narcissism fit into that scenario? Is it good that someone else's parents live with a married couple? Is narcissism a factor in that scenario? I mean, who are the narcissists there? And in terms of the other spouse, the spouse where it's the parents-in-law moving in, if they permit this to happen and go along with it, does that mean they're narcissists or that they're not narcissists? I'm just not sure how you can explain some of the actual dynamics in the actual case file, in the actual archive of the story, using these sort of generic little statements like things changed and she started to do really well. You need to anchor it in the actual narrative of what happened. So then there's another aspect where the YouTuber talks about what's his relationship with Nicole Kessinger, and he says he heaps love on her, and he's the full focus of their relationship, and this shows that he's a narcissist. Who doesn't like that? Who doesn't like someone being in love with you or being in love with someone else? And who isn't like that when you're in that situation? When you're in a situation of being in love, who doesn't shower someone with affection? If it's Valentine's Day, who doesn't buy roses and give cards and whatnot? Does that mean you're a narcissist if on Valentine's Day you do that? And isn't Valentine's Day a day that actually cynically, what's the word? It preys on the narcissism of people. Does that mean so where's the narcissism coming from? Is it just the relationship between Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger, or are all loving, sort of in love relationships about narcissism? Wow, someone loves me, I'm feeling really good about that. Oh shit, I'm a narcissist. I mean, who isn't like that? In terms of the love bombing, sending naked selfies, who was doing that? Was right. So I don't know. It just gets murkier and murkier from there. The reality is that Nicole Kessinger found Watts to be introverted. And so this whole idea that Chris Watts wanted to be the center of Nicole's world, he wanted to be needed, etc. Was he the center of Kessinger's world? When they went camping, whose idea was it to go camping? We know in the video that she sent, she said, "Thank you, Chris, for coming along." It seems to suggest that this was her idea. We know that Nicole Kessinger is a geologist, or she's educated in geology. She has an interest in nature. She has an interest in flowers and in the structure of the earth and so on. And so going to those sand dunes seemed more like her idea than his. He'd never made a campfire in his life, and she kind of jokingly mentioned that she showed him how to make a campfire. Why on earth would he take her camping if he'd never done it before in his life? He also mentioned to the police that Shan'ann had never gone on a hike in her life. So he'd never done that with Shan'ann. So it does feel like the camping trip was Kessinger's idea. So how is Watts being the center of attention in that situation? When they left the Lazy Dog restaurant on Saturday night, August 11th, because they were sitting too close to the door, was that his idea? Was it his idea to just leave the restaurant and go somewhere else? The YouTuber also talks about requiring a narcissistic supply, a narcissistic fuel. This is very psychobabbly stuff associated with what you would hear if you're watching Dr. Phil, and if you're reading psychology.com websites, you're gonna come across those terms: narcissistic supply, narcissistic fuel. Oh, like social media. Would you say that social media is narcissistic supply? Would you say that maybe social media is narcissistic fuel? Oh, you wouldn't. It's something else. So narcissistic supply is where you just need a person in front of you who is giving you compliments. You wouldn't go looking for that on social media, right? Because Chris Watts was never on social media. Shan'ann hijacked his account and also used his account to market Thrive. Incidentally, Shan'ann was constantly on social media. So Shan'ann was on social media to validate her and justify her feelings in terms of Nutgate. Thrive is all about social media. Thrive is all about telling the world that you have got this car and you're going on this holiday and look how happy you are and how much you're thriving. And then you want so much support from everyone saying, "I love that chocolate bar, I love that powder, and everything's going so great." What does that have to do with narcissistic supply? What does the Thrive business and the Thrive connection to social media have to do with narcissistic fuel? So I'm not a Thriver, and I'm on Facebook and I see someone talking about Thrive, and they're saying how well they're doing, they're saying how much weight they've lost, they're saying how healthy they feel, they say how happy their family is, they say how much money they're making, they say they are so looking forward to going to Las Vegas and they're going to have a wild party there. They just love the people that are part of the whole thing. It's a family. Does that have anything to do with narcissistic supply? Oh, okay, no. So it's actually the narcissistic supply is all to do with Chris Watts wanting a supply. That's it. By the way, in a situation where you're in a loveless marriage, you're not getting a narcissistic supply, you're not even getting a normal supply of affection. You're in a loveless marriage and you go somewhere else because, like most people, you want to be loved by somebody. Is that narcissistic supply? If you say, "I want to be loved by someone," is that narcissistic supply? Then the YouTuber goes on and says, a narcissist needs an ego boost, like they matter and are important. Is that what Chris Watts is like? He needs his ego boosted. He sort of needs to be part of those videos, and he needs to say how great he is, right? Let's take that statement about narcissists needing an ego boost and them needing to feel like they matter and needing to feel that they're important, and let's associate that with Nutgate. And there's so much we can say about that, but I'm not going to go into it. But at the end of the whole Nutgate thing, when Chris Watts was in North Carolina with her, Shan'ann's message to him was basically, and this is in the discovery, this isn't conjecture, it's not speculation, it's not someone's opinion. Shan'ann basically said to Chris Watts, choose me and the family and torpedo your parents. You don't need them. Let's cut your parents out of our lives. My life, as in Shan'ann's life. Your life, as in Chris, cut your parents out of your life. That'll make me feel better. And also cut them out of your children's life, right? And there was definitely an ego issue involved with Nutgate, because the message that Cindy gave to Shan'ann was, well, Cece needs to learn the lesson that she can't always get what she wants. So in other words, Shan'ann was upset that Cindy had brought out the ice cream, and Shan'ann was angry that, well, you could have almost killed my child. And Cindy was, well, there's another child here. It's Jamie's children, and I'm giving them ice cream. And yeah, well, if Cece may not eat certain food, she also needs to learn that. She also needs to learn that she can't eat certain foods. And Shan'ann couldn't abide this threat to her authority. On the 5th of August, Shan'ann wrote to Cassie Rosenberg that she needs a man that has the balls to protect his family. And at the same time, Shan'ann also wrote that Watts is a totally different person from the guy she's known for 8 years. Now, let's just think about that. Shan'ann wants Chris Watts to have the balls to protect his family. But what kind of protection is she talking about? She's talking about getting rid of his own parents. That's him having the balls to protect his family. And as we know, Chris Watts didn't want to do that, and he didn't do that. He kind of had the balls to, I don't know, I don't like using these words, but he had the balls to want to keep his family in terms of his parents. Unfortunately, with disastrous side effects in terms of his own personal family. Shan'ann also says he's a totally different person from the guy I've known for 8 years. That should have been set the alarm bells off in her mind. She should have seen, why is he totally different? How is he totally different? And the answer is that he was different in the sense that he had gotten some balls. She would tell him that she didn't like this, and she would expect him to do something when she asked, and he just wasn't doing it anymore. He wasn't showing her affection anymore, and so he was in a way that was becoming quite scary. He was developing balls to sort of go another route, and a route contrary to the route that Shan'ann wanted him to go onto. And so it raises another question: is how did Shan'ann not know that he was having an affair? How did Shan'ann not put two and two together? How did Shan'ann not see that? And what kind of person is Shan'ann that she didn't see what was happening right in front of her? Why is it that when he said that he would do these marriage courses, and we first said he wouldn't, and then she wrote him a love letter and he didn't write back, why did she not realize what was going on? I mean, at no point is there a message from Shan'ann saying, I know you're having an affair. Who is it with? What are you doing? There is a point where she did say, someone doesn't fall out of love with someone after 5.5 weeks unless they've met someone else. That's not even a direct accusation. That's sort of an indirect hint. Shan'ann never, if you take the confrontation with his parents and the whole Nutgate thing, and then you take the affair, why doesn't she confront him on the affair and say, yes or no, are you having an affair? What's going on here? Why are you always going to bed so early? Why haven't you been communicating? You must be having an affair. What else is going on? So why does Shan'ann not pursue that? Where's her focus? And so on the 5th of August, Shan'ann says she won't change a thing about herself, and she calls herself a saint for not telling his mom that she's a narcissist. And this is that second reference. She calls herself a saint for not telling his mom she's a narcissist, stupid bitch, and said they're done and never coming back. Someone saying, I will not change a thing about myself and I'm a saint and blah blah, that doesn't seem to be the kind of person who's going to be able to see reality. That seems to be someone who's going to see things their way and have things their way, and that's a narcissistic trait. So if we get back to what Shan'ann said about a man that has the balls to do, this is what she wants him to do, and he has no game. It's unfortunate to have to put it in these terms, but Watts did get the balls. He did get the balls to do something, and he did have some game in the way that he tried to fix what was going on. And I don't think the taunting helped. Did it help the situation to say to Chris Watts, to him and behind his back as well, that he has no balls? Did it help? That's just the question. Obviously, in a situation that's ended this way, you certainly don't want to say that could mean words have resulted in this tragedy. Because if we took that to heart, you would say, well, in any marriage, be careful of what you say. It could cause some kind of disaster. And obviously not everyone is going to act in this unacceptable way, to put it mildly. But words do have an effect, and insulting someone does have an effect. And the irony of this person who is all about abuse is that there's absolutely no abuse from Shan'ann to Chris Watts. Telling a man that he's not got any balls isn't abuse, right? If a man says something XYZ, that's abuse. But you can tell a man he has no game, you can tell him behind his back he has no game, and you can ridicule him on Facebook. None of that's abuse, because you can't abuse a man. You can't abuse a man verbally. It only works the other way around, right? So then the particular YouTuber talks about children that would interfere with getting the full attention of Kessinger, and then she refers to an audio clip where Nicole tells him to spend time with his children. Well, there's another anecdote too, and I don't think there's any question of whether Chris Watts was a good father until the moment he murdered his children. I don't think there's a question of whether he and them didn't get along until that 6-week period where they were not together. By all accounts, Shan'ann said that he was a good father. Shanann's parents said he was a good father. Watts' parents said he was a good father. Watts himself said that was the best part of his life, that he was a father. And one doesn't really get the impression that Kessinger had a problem with the children, although that did come up. It's not as though it didn't come up whatsoever. Kessinger did say that, she would want this experience of having children kind of for the first time with someone, not almost through a second-hand experience. These were texts sent to her friend Charlotte Nelson. So, and I think some of them were sent on the Sunday right before the murders. I say that under correction, but anyway, we do know that those texts were sent. Is that Kessinger being a narcissist, or is that healthy narcissism? If you're single and you want to be in a relationship with someone, are you being a narcissist if you say, well, I'd prefer the other person doesn't have children? Is that being a narcissist, or is that sort of a healthy way to want to conduct relationships? Gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it? But there's also another anecdote, and this is just to counter the YouTuber's contention that Watts wanted the full attention of Nicole Kessinger. In other words, from Watts' perspective, he wanted the full attention of Kessinger. That's why he killed his children. I think it's the other way around. I think Watts thought Kessinger wanted his full attention. In other words, he's responding possibly to her narcissism. It's not him being a narcissist. And we get the sort of context to that where she talks about, there's another anecdote too on July 4th where Nicole was upset because he had to take a call from Shan'ann and then went home. And she felt like because of that, because he took this longish call from her, and he felt that he was maybe taking a risk always not being at home, Kessinger felt that she'd always be second best. Now you take the narcissism question to that and you say, is Kessinger being a narcissist by feeling like she might always be second best? Or is that a healthy response to that situation? If we go to the discovery documents, we see that and this is the timeline from the cell phone recovery information. We see that on July 4th at 08:56, Watts called Shan'ann and held a 19-minute conversation. And then that day, Nicole went to Chris's home in Frederick to help him set up a diet and weight loss goals. One wonders if that was the real reason, because, why would Watts and Shan'ann have a 9-minute conversation and then Nicole would go to his house with him and then discuss exercise goals? In any event, Nicole said she was at his home that day, July 4th, and then after spending time with him, she went to watch a Colorado Rockies baseball game without him, and more than likely he would have wanted to go along to that game. In any event, at 22:44, quarter to 11 that night, we know Chris Watts watched the Independence Day fireworks with Nick and Amanda Thayer, and then he stopped by their phone afterwards, and he finally came home at quarter to 11 when his phone connected to their router. What we know from the discovery is that on July 4th they had an argument, Nicole and Chris Watts, and it was about her feeling like she would always come second best. And we'll deal with that in the next section, which is about dealing with healthy narcissism. So I want to touch on another aspect, which is that there is a perception that Shan'ann had, so this YouTuber has said that Watts murdered his children because he wanted, let's go back to what she actually said. He murdered his children because they would interfere with getting the full attention of Kessinger. So in other words, Watts wanted the full attention of Kessinger, and so that's why he murdered his children. That's not the answer. Watts felt that Kessinger wanted his full attention, but it was more to do with how he dealt with Shan'ann. I think the main reason why he did what he did in terms of the children had to do with the financial situation, the financial aspect in terms of the poor health of his children, and a lot of people have debated that and said no, the children are the picture of health. I think that's a factor, but I think the biggest factor was the fact that Shan'ann had turned the children against him and his parents. And you can look at that and say, no, I don't think that's the case. The issue is, what did Chris Watts think? Did Chris Watts think that the children had been turned against him? Did Chris Watts think that his children had been turned against his parents? And we know that on the night before Shan'ann's murder, on Sunday night, I actually say this under correction, it may have been early in the day, but Ronnie wanted to, I think, FaceTime with the children, and Watts said that he didn't think it was a good idea because the children would tell Shan'ann about that, and that would cause a tantrum. So here you have a situation where Watts is not even allowing his own children to talk to his father because of how Shan'ann might react to that situation. So you can see to what extent the children had been turned against them being Chris Watts and his parents. We also know that when he sat down and ate with them, they threw him with chicken nuggets, and he told the police that he missed that. I don't think he missed that. I think that was what he saw as, that was his life at that time with his children. Can you imagine that happening at a dinner table and Shan'ann sitting there? Shan'ann, someone who's very neat and likes things to be under control. Can you imagine Shan'ann sitting at the table and her children throwing this guy who has no balls and no game with chicken nuggets, her children throwing him? Can you imagine, just imagine that situation? And one does have to wonder whether that happened with Shan'ann present or whether that happened just when Shan'ann wasn't present. And if that happened with Shan'ann not present, why were the children doing that in the first place? So that's something I think to consider. And that brings us to the true crime rocket science take on this particular topic. This is really where the criminal psychology rubber starts to hit the road, where you start talking sensibly, I hope, and thinking sensibly, I hope, about narcissism. So that's point number 4. Is there such a thing as healthy narcissism? Because if we want to understand unhealthy narcissism, and let's come up with a term which doesn't exist, but let's tip our caps to these wonderful people who are talking about narcissism as though it's a factor, and let's refer to something called criminal narcissism. Never heard the term before, it's the first time I'm using it, but let's say, is there such a thing as healthy narcissism which we can distinguish from criminal narcissism? And this is how we address that. If you take siblings in any situation in a family, and the one sibling sees that another one has got a piece of a cake that's slightly bigger than the other sibling, should that sibling complain about that? And the answer is, of course they should. Of course, 3 siblings that each get a slice of cake should look at the other sibling's cake, compare it, and make sure that they're equal. Why? Because any sibling needs to make sure that they get as much as they can in the family setting, and that will later translate to the world setting. In other words, you need to preserve your status, you need to preserve your place in the world, you need to protect your self-interest. And so any situation where you have siblings, and the one sibling gets and all three siblings want something, and they want as much as they can get of it. And say the one sibling gets a quarter glass of, say, Coca-Cola at a birthday party, and another one gets, it's not a good example, but another one gets a half glass. Should the sibling that got the quarter glass be very happy with that? And the answer is no, they shouldn't be happy with that. And you can use many other examples. How close the one is sitting to the window, or if they're driving in the car, can I get to sit by the window? Parents with children know about all the little permutations where siblings bicker endlessly. And the bottom line is, this bickering is important. It's how siblings find their place in the world, and how they exert their power, and how they learn to negotiate what is theirs and what isn't theirs, right? It's finding the boundaries to control and to power, and to fathoming the edges of one's influence in a social society among social animals. So the sibling situation is really a great way to understand healthy narcissism. It's irritating, especially for parents, but it's necessary. One might look at that and say, okay, that's healthy narcissism. What about when someone's completely self-centered and everything is about them, and it's all about their dreams, and it's kind of everything that they do at the expense of everything else? Is that an unhealthy narcissism? If someone is completely focused on themselves and it's all about them, surely isn't that an unhealthy narcissism? And then we take that into the schema of a Olympic athlete, say someone like Michael Phelps, or some kind of Olympic sprinter, and we say this is someone who's totally self-focused. He's completely focused on the race that he's doing. He's controlling his diet in every aspect. He needs to preserve his peace of mind. He needs everything done his way. You can even look at certain tennis players like Rafa Nadal and others, where they have little rituals that are inviolable, and all these little things that must be done their way. And then you say, is that a healthy narcissism or not? And then you say, oh, well, of course, within sport it's fine, but that's an extreme amount of narcissism. Isn't that unhealthy? To be completely focused on yourself all the time, and paying attention to your body and how you are tuned to a certain outcome, and dreaming of yourself holding the gold medal. Isn't that unhealthy narcissism? And I think the whole world can agree that we celebrate that. We celebrate Olympic champions. We celebrate tennis champions. We celebrate people who are so focused and dedicated. And so here you have another example of extreme narcissism. It's an extreme amount of being self-obsessed and self-absorbed and caught up in your own saga of self-interest, and it's at the expense of someone else, because when 10 Olympic athletes line up to do the sprint, only one wins. And of course nobody looks at the guy who comes last. No one looks at the other 9 who lose. Everyone looks at the winner. And what's happening? They're projecting their own narcissism onto the winner. They're projecting their own narcissism onto this idea of triumphing and the gold medal. There's nothing unhealthy with that. So what is this problem with narcissism? Is narcissism having self-love? Should you not love yourself? Self-love includes things like grooming, taking a bath each night, getting out of bed and dressing appropriately and heading outside, having manners, having respect. All of that is to do with self-love. Isn't that narcissism? So where does narcissism cross that boundary between, let's call it healthy narcissism and unhealthy narcissism, or healthy narcissism and, let's say, either abuse or criminal narcissism? So someone might be very narcissistic and they eat healthily, but you could have someone as well who has develops an eating disorder because they want to appear, they're desperate to appear thin and acceptable to others. And it's as soon as the narcissism goes to a form of desperation and insufficiency and insecurity that you have a problem. And when you look at Shan'ann Watts and Chris Watts and you say, which one was the more insecure of the two? Which one was the more insufficient of the two? Which one was the more unhealthy of the two? What does that say? When we look at Chris Watts using the supplements, the shakes and the pills, he used them on a daily basis, and he lost 13 pounds between July 4th and August 11th. What does that say about his narcissism? Was that a healthy narcissism or unhealthy? And that's where you have a valid question. Is you say, when Chris started looking better and looking fit and all that, physical fitness, how did that impact on his narcissism? And as soon as you have that conversation, you start conflating how one appears, and that's really a question of vanity, with everybody else. Do you care about your weight? Do you care about how you look? Well, isn't that what the whole Thrive superstructure is built on? Vanity and narcissism. So if you really want to have a conversation about that and what's healthy narcissism and what's not, let's talk about that in the context of multi-level marketing and especially Thrive. The word Thrive itself is a nod to healthy narcissism. On page 16 of the CBI report, and this deals with when Watts and Kessinger fought. Did they ever fight? This is really important. When couples fight, it has to do with different attitudes and potentially to do with issues of control and narcissism in different areas, right? And so when Chris Watts was asked whether they ever fought, Chris Watts answered they never fought, but he had to calm Kessinger down a few times. Kessinger got upset when she realized she would always be the other person and Watts would always put his wife first. Now if you just look at that question again, it's Watts is putting his wife first, right? But I thought from this YouTuber that Watts wanted to be the focus, but now why is he putting his wife first? Why is he even taking her calls? Why is he going to North Carolina? Why is he moving into an apartment so that his kids can visit him? Why is he babysitting his children when he could be with Kessinger the last weekend that they were together, etc., etc.? And so, yeah, you could justifiably say, isn't Kessinger being unreasonable here? He's still married to his wife, so isn't she being narcissistic here? I don't like that word because it just interferes with just the way that we interpret ordinary human dynamics. Why must one person be a narcissist and what is the other person? It just doesn't really work. You just end up infesting every little discussion with that word. In terms of this, page 16, he tells Kessinger, just because he has to leave doesn't mean Kessinger had to take a step back. He's saying, well, just because I've got to go somewhere doesn't mean you out of the picture. But Kessinger didn't like that, and she said she thought it was better that they didn't see each other for the rest of the day, and that was July 4th. So July 4th is quite a big deal. It's Independence Day, the fireworks, it's a holiday, and she went to watch a baseball game, and they spent that day apart. And it was obviously because Kessinger felt stung. She felt she wanted to be with what she wanted to be the center of his attention. Does that make, if you want to be the center of someone's attention that loves you, that you love, does that make you a narcissist? And in the end, Kessinger, at the end of that day, ended up asking him to come over after she returned from the baseball game, and he went to her house, and presumably he slept at the house. Also, interestingly, while Kessinger was in a relationship with Watts, apparently, she set up a couple of dates on her eHarmony app, and men never showed up. Watts said he didn't know Kessinger was dating other people until a few weeks later. And then you say, well, is that being a narcissist? The fact that Kessinger was dating others, does that mean she was sort of trying to keep her bread buttered on both sides? Would she be the only person to ever do that in the world? Chris Watts was a married man and he had children, so wasn't, and Kessinger was single, she had her own home, she had a job. Wasn't she entitled to see if the grass was green on the other side? Where, weren't there other men that weren't there other available men that weren't married, that didn't have children? Wasn't she within her rights to look around? Is that healthy narcissism or unhealthy narcissism? Kessinger thought he was different because he would fix things around her apartment for her, which no one had done for her in the past. I find that quite sad, that almost that other men in Kessinger's life had not paid that much attention to her and didn't really do things for her. And so when Chris did that for her, it meant something to her, and she felt his affection and care. Okay, let's wrap up. Social media illustrates how narcissistic our society is becoming. Social media is normal, and it shows how narcissism is normal. Social media isn't healthy as a general rule. It riles people up, it's populist, it separates people into tribes, it makes people reactionary and emotional. Social media is all about me, it's all about how many notifications and followers I have. It's entirely self-reinforcing and self-justifying and self-validating. It's not healthy. And social media is having an impact on true crime. Shan'ann's Facebook gives us insight into this true crime case, and it's not the first. There's even the possibility that subsequent to the first confession and the conjectures on YouTube about shadows in the driveway, that Chris Watts was influenced by that in how he handled the second confession. In other words, the way Chris Watts was thinking about his own situation was affected by what he heard others were thinking and saying about it on social media, which then contaminated the narrative of this person at the center of it. So it no longer becomes simply the person at the center of it, and that's the full story. It becomes an interchange between the criminal society and social media, and that's an aspect that's not been really thought about or addressed in much detail. I have a theory that the Shadows video, I'm not saying that he saw it, but that someone saw it and told him about it, because it was a big issue. It was, did this mean that the children were still alive? And I have a feeling that Watts knew about it before the second confession, before that interrogation in mid-February, February 18th. And I think Watts saw how it could benefit him if he said, yes, no, they were still alive. And I'll tell you why. A premeditated murder is much worse than the scenario he gave during the second confession. Bear in mind, the first confession was a relatively mild scenario in his version, where Shan'ann did X and Y. The second confession is an adaptation on that. I don't think it's true either, but it's also a milder version than the reality. And so what is reality? Reality is premeditated murder, which, as I say, is much worse. A lot of people have said that can't be. What he described couldn't be more horrible. It can be more horrible. The scenario he gave presents murder as an inexplicable afterthought that doesn't make sense, that's confusing, but it's somehow not as bad as someone spontaneously, not spontaneously, but as part of a pre-planned scenario, killing his own family step by step. And this is what I mean by that. In a premeditated scenario, you have someone who is determined to fix his situation. He is presented with a broken machine, and he's also presented with a brand new machine. It's like with a broken car and a brand new car. What's he going to do with the one? What's he going to do with the other? Is he going to fix the broken car, or is he going to crush it and get rid of it? So in a situation of a premeditated murder, it meant while he was at home with them, he's plotting their demise. While they're at the birthday party, he's piecing together where to bury their bodies. While the children are playing in that little inflatable swimming pool, he's imagining them being pushed through the thief hatches into a different kind of pool of oil. That's cold. That's callous. And in the CBI report, they actually asked him, what could he have told, what could the authorities have told him that would have gotten him to tell them the truth? And what's then referred to the video. And he says when he was in the interrogation room, he was nervous, he knew something was wrong, and he knew they were going to find out. He said he'd watched enough TV shows, but he'd never spoken to an officer in the past. He struggled with the horror of knowing what he did and trying to tell someone else about it. He didn't even want to admit to himself what he had done. He knew what he did was horrific and how much it would hurt other people. He couldn't admit to himself that he had done it, so he couldn't admit it to the police. You can dismiss this and say it's not true and I don't believe it, but it rings true. It does ring true that he couldn't admit the truth because it was so horrible. And if you've watched Mindhunter or other things, there's some serial killers who can talk about what they did. Didn't talk about what he did. When he did talk about certain aspects, he did. He certainly did appear disturbingly unemotional. That is a fact. So there is likely some sociopathic aspect, but I wouldn't say he's a sociopath. I would just say there's an aspect that needs to be addressed, which probably has more to do with introversion and a lack of social. Is not very socialized, but that's not sociopathy. If he was a sociopath, he wouldn't need to confess, and he wouldn't need to talk to anyone about it, and he wouldn't feel horrified by what he'd done. In any event, in that same section, they ask him how they could have tricked him into revealing the truth earlier, and he says, if we would have lied and told him we saw the video of the kids in the truck. And I think that's a big statement from him, because he does mention lying. He's saying that if they saw the video of the kids in the truck, this is presumably the video of the kids being alive, then he would have told them the truth. It's also interesting that he says he talked to his dad because he wanted to tell him he loved him, and it was probably the last time he would see him outside of the cell. Again, you look at that and you say, is that narcissism, or is that healthy narcissism of a murderer? The other aspect that's in the discovery in the CBI report is where they show him pictures of the girls during the interrogation, and he says that definitely got into my head. Again, if he was a person with no emotions, a heartless monster, then showing the pictures of the girls would have no effect. And when they asked him about him not showing emotions, when he was shown the pictures, he said he's the type of person to hold it all in and not show emotion. And that's the part that's very misunderstood about Chris Watts, is someone who is a type of person that holds emotions in isn't necessarily a sociopath. There's a very well-known kind of person who holds their emotions in. It's an introvert, and they're very well known. As an addendum to this section, I want to talk about the undiscovered country of the Chris Watts case, which is how narcissism changes obsessive compulsive disorder. I've already mentioned that OCD is a very clear and undisputed aspect of this case, but no one wants to talk about how narcissism could change that. And I'm going to do so very briefly here. I've done so in more detail in the books. When we go to psychcentral.com, there's an article about that, and we see an anecdote where it refers to a teenager coming into someone's office complaining about anxiety experienced from their obsessive compulsive disordered parent. So the teenager is complaining about their OCD parent, and then the teenager gives the I presume it's the psychologist a few examples, and so yeah they are, and I quote: "The compulsive hand washing that led to dry and sometimes bloody hands were imposed on everyone in the household. There was a sense of superiority that this family did things such as proper cleaning and sterilized laundry better than others. The excessive rituals before and after people would leave the house were designed to impress a magazine decorating editor. Unable to keep up with the expectations of the parent, the teenager felt defeated." I think that's quite important. End quote. I think that's quite important. When you have someone with OCD, you're dealing with someone who has a lot of expectations and rituals about themselves, and you've now got to keep up with them. You've got to keep up with all the little things that they want you to do, and that does, over a long period of time, that can leave you feeling defeated, that no matter what you do, you're never going to adequately address that person's anxiety and need for control. No matter what you do, you're just not doing enough, right? So the psychologist went and met the parent, and this was her assessment. It became apparent that in addition to the OCD, they had narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. This changes everything: the approach, the treatment planning, and the management of the OCD, because the underlying motive is completely different. A person who has narcissistic personality disorder and OCD is not likely to change their behavior, but it can be guided so as not to impose destructively onto others. I just want to repeat that, is that someone with OCD and narcissism isn't going to be able to change their behavior. You're basically stuck with someone like that. And the best that you can do is explain to a person like that how they're imposing their rituals on others, imposing their strictures and their controls on others is destructive. And I'm going to say something that's probably going to surprise a lot of people, but it shouldn't, and probably going to upset a lot of people, but it shouldn't. The whole Nutgate thing is exhibit A on someone destructively imposing their behavior on others, right? I don't think we've heard people say that before, and a lot of people, I think, have defended Shan'ann. She's just defending her children. Those people don't recognize what is unhealthy narcissism. By contrast, and again this is quoting from this article, a person with OCD frequently wants their behavior to change and is embarrassed when they impose it on others. So I want to be very clear with this. Someone who only has OCD feels uncomfortable with it and is embarrassed by it. But someone with OCD and narcissism isn't. And this is why TCRS is opposed to labels. Labels like monster, evil, psychopath, sociopath, pedophile, and narcissist. Just to give you an example, in the John Benet Ramsey case, they talk about a pedophile intruder, whatever. I'll tell you why it's a destructive and not helpful label. As soon as you talk about a pedophile in children, in the homicides of children or the assaults of children, you immediately imply that the pedophile can only be an adult. In other words, a child that has been sexually abused can only be sexually abused by a pedophile. Well, it's an adult, and that's not the case. Children are more often, when there's sexual assault, are more often abused by someone that's either their age or of a similar age. So young children or young adults. But as soon as you say pedophile, you tend to think of an adult, especially an older adult. As soon as we bring in labels, we're taking away from the cases. We're taking away the merits of their own cases, and we dehumanize the people in them. And we also dehumanize ourselves. We stand from the outside and we name call into these cases, and we think we're very clever, and we think we've sort of masters of the universe. We've built a fortress of information through this one single term we're using. But what labels do is they dissociate and they separate. According to Dr. Phil, you can't make sense of the Chris Watts case. You can. TCRS says you can, and the 9 books I've written have done that. The first book did that. If we're going to reduce the case to labels, well, then find the right one. And that's simplistic. It's simplistic to find a label, but eventually, after all the research, after you've studied the case in detail, after you've researched the case from one end to the other, that's when you can begin to simplify the case. It's important to do this at the end, not the beginning. If you want to discuss the psychology of the case in an authentic way, then we do the Chris Watts case in an authentic way. You don't discuss the narcissism aspect. You discuss introversion.